The slap echoed in the manicured silence of the suburban street. It was a sound that did not belong there, sharp and ugly against the backdrop of trimmed lawns and pristine houses. Julian Thorne's hand left a bright red mark on the girl's cheek. Sarah Jenkins stumbled back, her books scattering across the perfect green grass of her own front yard. She was 15, all sharp angles and quiet fear, and she was no match for the boy in front of her. He was bigger, older, and filled with the casual cruelty that came from a lifetime of never being told no. "I told you to stay away from me," Julian hissed, his face a mask of privileged rage. "I told you what would happen." A low growl answered him. Between Julian and Sarah, a German shepherd moved with the fluid grace of a predator. His name was Max. He was old, his muzzle dusted with gray, but his eyes were clear and intelligent. One of his ears had a permanent, thoughtful flop. He placed his body squarely in front of Sarah, a living shield of fur and muscle. He did not bark. He did not need to. The sound rumbling in his chest was enough. Julian sneered. "Get your mutt out of my face." Sarah found her voice, a thin, wavering thing. "Leave him alone. Leave us alone." For a moment, Julian hesitated. He looked at the dog, then at the girl, and then at the windows of the neighboring houses. Curtains twitched. Phones were visible. Small black rectangles held up to record, but not to help. No one was coming. No one ever did when a thorn was involved. Confidence surged back into him. He took a step forward. Max's growl deepened. It was his final warning. Julian ignored it. He swung his leg, his expensive sneaker connecting with the dog's ribs in a sickening thud. Max yelped, a sharp cry of pain, and his legs buckled. He fell to the grass, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He tried to get up, his front paws scrambling for purchase, but the blow had stolen his strength. He could only lift his head and watch, his brown eyes filled with a pained loyalty. Sarah screamed. It was a raw, desperate sound. She threw herself toward Max, but Julian grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her skin like claws. "You see?" he said, his voice low and triumphant. "No one protects you." He was wrong. Down the street, a man had stopped walking. He was not from this neighborhood of wealth and quiet complicity. His clothes were simple: worn jeans, a plain gray t-shirt, and combat boots that had seen harder miles than any of these paved roads. His name was John Creed. He had been on his way to see Sarah, to check in on the daughter of his fallen brother-in-arms. A simple visit, a quiet duty. He saw the boy. He saw the girl on the ground. He saw the dog, Max, the military working dog he himself had arranged to be given to Sarah after her father's death. He saw the limp in the old soldier's gait, and something inside him, a thing he had tried to bury for years under layers of silence and solitude, began to stir. The world sharpened. The muted colors of his quiet life snapped into high definition. He saw the tension in the boy's shoulders, the fear in the girl's eyes, the shallow, pained breathing of the dog. He saw the twitching curtains and the recording phones. He saw it all. John Creed started walking again. His pace was not hurried. It was deliberate. Each step was a promise. Julian Thorne never saw him coming. One moment he was holding Sarah's arm, enjoying her terror. The next, a shadow fell over him. A hand, hard as stone and covered in faded scars, closed around his wrist. It did not squeeze with anger. It applied pressure with an unnerving, anatomical precision. Nerves screamed. Bones ground together. Julian cried out and let go of Sarah. He turned to face the man, his face contorted in a mixture of pain and outrage. "Who the hell are you?" John Creed did not answer. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, were not on Julian. They were on Sarah, who was now kneeling beside Max, her tears falling onto his dark fur. "Are you hurt?" John's voice was quiet. It was a gravelly thing, unused to conversation. Sarah shook her head, unable to speak. She pointed a trembling finger at Max. He kicked him." John's gaze shifted. It moved from Sarah to the dog, and then finally, it settled on Julian Thorne. For the first time, Julian felt a sliver of something other than arrogance. It was cold. It was fear. "Let go of me," Julian demanded, trying to pull his wrist free. The grip did not yield. It was like being clamped in a vice. "You put your hands on her," John stated. It was not a question. "You hurt a soldier." Julian laughed, a strained, nervous sound. "That's a dog." "He has more honor than you ever will," John said. He tightened his grip just slightly. A sharp gasp of pain escaped Julian's lips. "Go home. Tell your father what you did. Tell him a friend of Sergeant Jenkins came to visit." He released Julian's wrist. Julian stumbled back, cradling his hand. He shot a hateful glare at John, at Sarah, at the wounded dog. But the bravado was gone, replaced by a sullen resentment. He turned and stalked away, the implied threat hanging in the air. John knelt beside Sarah. He ran a practiced hand over Max's side, feeling for broken ribs. The dog whimpered, but licked his hand weakly. "He's hurt," Sarah whispered. "I know," John said. "We'll take care of him." He looked at her, at the red mark on her face, at the terror still swimming in her eyes. This was Mark Jenkins's daughter, the man who had died saving John's life in a dusty, forgotten corner of the world. He had owed Mark a debt he could never repay. But maybe he could pay a small part of it now. He met her gaze. "This ends now," he said, his voice low but absolute. "I promise you." In that moment, the dormant warrior awoke. The quiet life was over. A promise had been made. The phone call came 2 hours later. Sarah was with her aunt, who was her legal guardian, at the emergency vet. Max had 2 broken ribs and severe bruising. He would recover, but it would be slow. John had stayed with them, a silent, imposing presence in the sterile waiting room, until he was sure they were safe. Now, back in his Spartan apartment across town, his phone buzzed. The number was unlisted. He answered. "Is this Mr. Creed?" The voice was smooth, cultured, and dripping with condescension. "It is." "This is Marcus Thorne, Julian's father. It seems there was a misunderstanding today. My son is a spirited boy. He sometimes gets carried away." John said nothing. He stood by his window, looking out at the city lights. They seemed distant, cold. "I understand you are a veteran," Thorne continued. "We appreciate your service, of course. To show that appreciation and to smooth over this whole unfortunate incident, I'd like to make a contribution. Let's say $50,000 for your troubles and for your silence." The offer hung in the air, a greasy, ugly thing. It was the way Marcus Thorne solved all his problems, with money, with power. "The girl's father was my friend," John said, his voice flat. "A dead friend," Thorne countered, a hint of impatience in his tone. "He can't help her now, but I can help you. Everyone has a price, Mr. Creed. I'm simply trying to find yours." John was silent for a long moment. He thought of Mark Jenkins bleeding out in the sand. His last words a plea for John to look after his daughter. He thought of Sarah's terrified face and Max's pained whimper. "You're right," John said softly. A satisfied chuckle came from the other end of the line. "I knew you were a reasonable man. There is a price, John continued, his voice hardening into something cold and sharp as forged steel. You will turn your son in to the police for assault. You will pay for the dog's medical bills. You will issue a public apology to Sarah Jenkins, and then you will leave her and her family alone. Permanently. The silence on the other end was heavy, shocked. That is the price, John finished. There is no other. Marcus Thorne's smooth facade finally cracked. His voice became a venomous hiss. You have no idea who you're dealing with. You are a ghost, a nobody. I own this city. I own the police. I own the courts. You have just made the biggest mistake of your life. No, John replied, his voice chillingly calm. You made the mistake when your son laid his hands on that girl. You compounded it when he hurt that dog. And you sealed it when you called this number. He hung up the phone. The threat was clear. The lines were drawn. Marcus Thorne had his money and his influence. John Creed had a promise to keep. The next morning, John accompanied Sarah and her aunt, Mary, to the police station. The building was old, the air thick with the smell of stale coffee and bureaucratic indifference. The officer at the desk, a man with a tired face and a bulging gut, listened to their story with a practiced look of disinterest. He took notes. He sighed. He tapped his pen on his desk. A teenage squabble, the officer said finally. Kids get into fights, and you're saying he kicked a dog? He assaulted my niece, Mary said, her voice tight with anger. And he severely injured her dog. There were witnesses. The officer leaned back in his chair, a smug little smile on his lips. Witnesses who have come forward? Silence. Look, the officer said, his tone condescending. This is Julian Thorne we're talking about. His father is Marcus Thorne, a pillar of this community. Are you sure you want to make these kinds of accusations? John stepped forward. He placed his hands flat on the high counter. He did not lean. He did not loom. He simply stood there, his presence filling the space. We are filing a report, John said. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the officer's apathy. The officer's eyes met John's. For a second, his smugness faltered. He saw something in those cold, gray eyes that made him uneasy. But years of habit, of knowing who paid the bills in this town, won out. He shrugged and pushed a form across the counter. Fill this out, we'll look into it. They knew he would not. The report would be filed and then buried. It was a dead end. Systemic corruption was not a wall you could punch through. It was a swamp that swallowed you whole. The school was no different. The principal listened patiently, his hands steepled on his large mahogany desk. He expressed deep concern. He used words like unfortunate and troubling. Then he explained that the Thorne family had just funded the new science wing. He explained that Julian was under a lot of pressure. He suggested that perhaps Sarah had misunderstood the situation. By the time they left, the message was clear. The official channels were closed to them. They were on their own. The harassment started that night. It began subtly. A car driving slowly past their house multiple times. A hang-up call in the middle of the night. Then, it escalated. Sarah woke up to find the word liar spray-painted in huge red letters across their garage door. The next day, her aunt's car had all 4 tires slashed. A smear campaign began online. Anonymous accounts posted vicious rumors about Sarah on social media, twisting her into an unstable aggressor. Photos of her, taken without her knowledge, appeared online with cruel captions. The digital mob, faceless and merciless, piled on. John saw the toll it was taking. He saw the light dimming in Sarah's eyes, the fear returning. He saw the exhaustion and despair on her aunt's face. He started staying at their house, sleeping on the couch. Max, bandaged and moving stiffly, would lie on the floor beside him, a wounded but vigilant guardian. John established a perimeter. He checked locks. He watched the street from the shadows of the living room window. He was back in a war zone, only this one had picket fences and flower beds. One afternoon, Julian Thorne pushed his luck. Sarah was walking Max in the park. The dog needed gentle exercise, and she needed a moment of fresh air. John was 50 yards behind, a silent escort. He had insisted. Julian appeared as if from nowhere, flanked by 2 of his friends from the football team. They blocked Sarah's path. "Look who it is," Julian sneered, his confidence restored by his posse. "Walking your broken mutt. You should have it put down." Max growled, a low, pained rumble. He tried to stand taller, to put himself between Sarah and the threat, but his injured ribs made him flinch. Sarah clutched the leash. "Get away from us." "Or what?" Julian took a step closer. "You going to call your crazy vet friend? He's not here now, is he?" He reached for her. He never touched her. John was there. He moved with a speed that was terrifyingly silent. One moment he was a distant figure, the next he was a solid wall of muscle between the boys and Sarah. He did not say a word. He just looked at them. His face was a blank canvas of control, but his eyes were filled with a cold, lethal promise. Julian's friends, who had been laughing and posturing, took an involuntary step back. They were bullies, not fighters, and they recognized a predator when they saw one. Julian, however, was too arrogant to back down completely. "This doesn't concern you, old man." "Everything that concerns her concerns me," John replied, his voice barely a whisper. "This is your last warning. The next time you come near her, I will not be this polite." He took a half step forward. It was all it took. The 3 boys practically fell over each other to get away. They fled, their bravado evaporating into the afternoon air. John turned to Sarah. She was shaking. He put a hand gently on her shoulder. "He won't stop," she whispered, her voice breaking. "They'll never stop." John looked down at the determined, wounded dog at her side. He looked at the brave, terrified girl who was the last living piece of his best friend. He knew she was right. Thorne would not stop. He would only escalate. He could not fight this war alone. Not anymore. The system was rigged. The enemy had unlimited resources. It was time to call in the teams. That night, after Sarah and her aunt were asleep, John sat in the quiet dark of the living room. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to a number he had not dialed in 3 years. The name on the screen was simple: Reaper. He pressed call. It rang once. "Go for Reaper." The voice was sharp, professional, and awake. SEALs never truly slept. "It's Creed," John said. There was a pause, then a low whistle. "John. Man, it's been a long time. Everything okay? I need a favor. Name it. You know the rules. For you, anything." John explained the situation. He was concise, tactical. He laid out the facts. The girl, the father, the assault, the corrupt town, the untouchable antagonist. He left out the emotion, but Reaper could hear it anyway, simmering beneath the surface of the professional briefing. "So, a local kingpin is running a campaign of terror against a Gold Star kid," Reaper summarized, his voice losing its casual tone and taking on a hard edge. "And the system is compromised." "That's the shape of it," John confirmed. "What's the objective?" "I made her a promise. I intend to keep it. I need to dismantle his operation. I need leverage. I need to burn his whole world to the ground." Reaper was silent for a moment. Then, "Ghost is with me. We were just finishing a security contract in Denver. We can be wheels up in 2 hours. Send me the location. We'll set up an off-site OP. What do you need first?" "Surveillance," John said. "I need eyes on Thorne. Father and son. I need to know everything they do, everyone they talk to. I need to find their weaknesses." "Consider it done," Reaper said. "And John, welcome back." John hung up. For the first time in days, he felt a sliver of something other than cold rage. He felt hope. The cavalry was coming. His next call was to a number he found after a deep dive online. It belonged to an investigative journalist named Alice Reed. Her blog was a lonely voice in the local media landscape, filled with well-researched but largely ignored articles about civic corruption. She had written about Marcus Thorne twice, hinting at bribery and backroom deals, but had never been able to make anything stick. She answered on the fourth ring, her voice wary. John introduced himself, not as a SEAL, but as a friend of the Jenkins family. He told her he had information about Marcus Thorne, information she could verify. "I've been trying to get a real source on Thorne for years," she said, a spark of interest in her voice. "He's a ghost. He uses layers of lawyers and shell companies. What do you have?" "I have a new victim," John said, "and I have a team that can get you the proof you need to print. But I need your help. I need your research. I need to know who else he's hurt." They agreed to meet. His final call was to a man named Ben Carter. Carter was a lawyer, a former JAG officer who now ran a small pro bono practice dedicated to helping veterans. His reputation was that of a pit bull who fought impossible cases with a relentless tenacity. John laid out the legal side of the situation. The stonewalling by the police, the school's complicity. She saw classic rich guy playbook. Carter grunted over the phone. Intimidate, isolate, and bury them in legal fees they can't afford. I've seen it 100 times. The only way to beat it is to go around them. Hit them with something they can't control, something outside their sphere of influence. "That's the plan," John said. "I'm building the case. I need you to be ready to fire the gun when it's loaded." "Son," Carter said, a grim smile in his voice, "I was born ready. Let me know what you find. This one's on the house." John ended the call. The pieces were moving. He was no longer a lone man against a corrupt system. He was the commander of a small, righteous army. He had his tactical team, his media operative, and his legal counsel. He had a network. Clear's throat. Over the next few days, the dynamic shifted. Ghost, a quiet genius with a laptop, set up a covert command post in a nearby motel room. He was a master of the digital world. He bypassed security systems, intercepted communications, and peeled back the layers of Marcus Thorne's empire. Reaper provided tactical oversight, analyzing the patterns of Thorne's movements and identifying potential threats. He was the mission planner, the man who saw 3 moves ahead. They discovered that Thorne's private security team was sloppy, a collection of hired thugs more suited to intimidation than actual protection. Ghost found a financial trail of payoffs to the police chief and 2 city council members. It was the proof Alice Reed had always needed. Alice, in turn, worked her own sources. She remembered a story from 5 years prior. A young woman, a former intern at Thorne's company, had accused Julian of assault. The case had vanished. The woman had signed a non-disclosure agreement, taken a settlement, and left town. Alice found her. At first, the woman was terrified. She refused to speak, but Alice was persistent. She told her about Sarah. She told her she was not alone anymore. John spoke to her himself. He did not pressure her. He simply told her Sarah's story and made her the same promise he had made to Sarah. That this would end. He told her that courage was not about the absence of fear, but about acting in spite of it. Something in his quiet conviction reached her. She agreed to provide a sworn affidavit to tell her story on the condition of anonymity until she could be guaranteed protection. The net was tightening around Marcus Thorne, and he could feel it. He just did not know where it was coming from. The harassment against Sarah stopped, but it was replaced by a tense, unnerving quiet. It was the calm before the storm. Thorne, a man who believed in overwhelming force, decided to end it. He made a call, not to his lawyers, but to someone else. Someone who solved problems in a more permanent way. Reaper picked it up on the wiretap. "He's done playing games, John. He just hired a crew, ex-military, but not our kind. Mercs. He wants you scared off or put in the ground, and he specifically mentioned the girl." The words sent a chill down John's spine. He had expected escalation, but not this. Not against Sarah. The breaking point had arrived. It happened 2 nights later. John had stepped out to meet with Detective Miller, the one honest cop Alice Reed had identified within the corrupt department. Miller was disgusted by his superiors and agreed to help, but he needed undeniable physical evidence to get a state-level warrant that would bypass his own chief. John was gone for less than an hour. It was all the time they needed. Sarah was taking Max out for a final walk in the backyard. The yard was fenced, illuminated by a single porch light. It was supposed to be safe. Julian Thorne was not there for a fight. He was there to deliver a final, brutal message from his father. He came over the back fence, silent and quick. Sarah did not see him until he was right in front of her. His eyes were wild, his face twisted with a furious desperation. "You should have taken the money," he snarled. Max, despite his injuries, reacted instantly. He launched himself at Julian, a blur of black and tan fur. He bit down hard on Julian's arm, his old instincts overriding the pain in his ribs. Julian screamed in pain and rage. He shook his arm violently, slamming the dog against the side of the house. Max lost his grip, falling to the ground with a sickening thud. He lay there, stunned and unmoving. Sarah ran. She screamed for her aunt, for John, for anyone. Julian caught her by the hair and threw her to the ground. He stood over her, his chest heaving. "My father told me to make you understand," he panted, a trickle of blood running down his arm from Max's bite. "He said you need to learn to be quiet." He kicked her. Once. Twice. He kicked her with a savage, unrestrained fury. He kicked her until she stopped moving, until she was just a small, broken heap on the grass. He stood there for a moment, breathing heavily, looking down at his work. Then he heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. He scrambled back over the fence and disappeared into the darkness. When John found her, the world stopped. He saw the still form of the dog. He saw the crumpled shape of the girl. For a terrifying second, he thought he was too late. He knelt beside her, his hands shaking for the first time in a decade. He felt for a pulse. It was there. Faint, but there. He scooped her up into his arms. He was dimly aware of her aunt screaming, of calling 911. But all he could see was Sarah's pale, bruised face. All he could feel was the terrible, fragile weight of her in his arms. This was his fault. He had brought this war to her doorstep. He had underestimated the enemy's depravity. He rode in the ambulance, never taking his eyes off her. At the hospital, he waited in the stark, white hallway as doctors and nurses rushed around her. The diagnosis came back: a severe concussion, 3 broken ribs, a fractured wrist, and massive internal bruising. She would live. But something inside John Creed had died. The controlled, tactical warrior was gone, consumed by a pure, cold fire. He stood in the waiting room, looking at his reflection in the dark glass of the window. He saw the face of a man who had failed in his one true mission: to protect the innocent, to honor the memory of his friend. His phone buzzed. It was Reaper. "John, we saw him. Our long-range thermal picked up a figure leaving the backyard. We have his heat signature all the way to the Thorne estate. It was Julian." John closed his eyes. "Did you get anything else?" "Better," Reaper said, his voice grim. "The neighbor's security camera, the one pointed at the street. It caught Julian climbing the fence. It's grainy, but it's him. And Sarah's aunt gave us the clothes she was wearing. The forensics team from Carter's office is on it now. The blood on her sleeve is not hers, and she has skin under her fingernails. It'll be a DNA match to the bite on his arm." They had him. They had the physical evidence Miller needed. But it was not enough. Not anymore. An arrest, a trial, that was the system's justice. It was slow. It was uncertain, and it would not undo the damage done to the girl lying in that hospital bed. John opened his eyes. The reflection that stared back at him was a stranger, a man stripped of all restraint. "Reaper," he said, his voice a low, dead thing. "The book is closed. We're not following their rules anymore." "What's the play, John?" "The objective has changed," John said. "It's not about justice anymore. It's about eradication. We're not just taking down the son. We're taking down the father. We're taking down his entire network. We're salting the earth so nothing like this can ever grow here again." "I'm listening." "Ghost," John commanded. "I want every piece of dirt you have on Marcus Thorne. Financial crimes, payoffs, blackmail, everything. I don't care how you get it. I want it all, and I want it now." "Ben," he said, switching to his lawyer, "get that affidavit from the first victim. Get a statement from Sarah's aunt. Prepare a federal filing. We're going over the head of the local DA. Alice," he continued, his plan forming in the cold calculus of his rage. "Get ready to publish. When I give the signal, I want you to launch everything. The story, the evidence, the affidavits. I want to light a fire so big the whole world will see it. And Reaper," he finished, "tell Detective Miller to get his state task force ready. Tell him the evidence is coming. Tell him to be ready to move on my signal. No one in that local department is to be trusted." A new war had been declared. The gloves were off. The reckoning was at hand. For the next 24 hours, the team worked with a furious, synchronized intensity. Ghost was a phantom in the machine. He breached the firewalls of Thorne's corporate servers, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He found what he was looking for: a hidden ledger, a detailed record of every bribe, every illegal payoff, every silenced victim. It was Thorne's insurance file, and it was the key to everything. He downloaded it, encrypted it, and sent it to John. Ben Carter worked through the night with a team of paralegals, drafting a massive racketeer-influenced and corrupt organizations act lawsuit, a RICO case. It named Marcus Thorne, Julian Thorne, the chief of police, and 2 city council members as part of a criminal enterprise. It was a legal bomb. Alice Reed wrote the story of her life. She wove together the testimony of the first victim, the brutal assault on Sarah, and the mountain of financial evidence from Ghost. It was a damning, irrefutable narrative of corruption and cruelty. She prepared it for publication on a national news platform that could not be intimidated. In the hospital, Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness. John sat by her bedside, a silent vigil. When she was awake, he was there. He told her what they were doing. He told her she was not alone. Her voice was a hoarse whisper, but her eyes were clear. The fear was gone, replaced by a fragile, burning resolve. She agreed to give a statement, recorded by Alice on a small camera. She looked directly into the lens, her bruised face a testament to Julian's brutality. "I am not afraid of you anymore," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "You have to be held accountable for what you did to me and to the others." It was the most powerful weapon they had. The next day, John gave the signal. The takedown was executed with military precision. At exactly 9 a.m., Alice Reed's article went live. It hit the internet like a thunderclap. The story, complete with scanned documents from the secret ledger and Sarah's heartbreaking video statement, went viral within minutes. National news outlets picked it up. The story of the corrupt tyrant of a small town and the girl who refused to be silenced was everywhere. At 9:01 a.m., Ben Carter filed the RICO lawsuit with the federal district court. The clerk, alerted by a sympathetic federal marshal, accepted the filing and sealed it on an emergency basis. Warrants were issued by a federal judge within the hour. Marcus Thorne was in a board meeting when his phone began to buzz incessantly. He ignored it. Then his secretary burst in, her face pale. "Mr. Thorne, you need to see this." She showed him the article on her tablet. He saw his secret ledger, his payoffs, his crimes, all laid bare for the world to see. His face went white. The untouchable man had been touched. He stood up, his arrogance shattered, replaced by a dawning panic. "This meeting is over." He never made it to the door. The doors to the boardroom swung open. Detective Miller stood there, flanked by a dozen state police officers in tactical gear. He held up a warrant. "Marcus Thorne!" Miller's voice boomed in the suddenly silent room. "You are under arrest for conspiracy, bribery, and racketeering." Thorne stared, his mouth agape. "You can't do this. I own this town." "Not anymore," Miller said, as two officers snapped handcuffs on Thorne's wrists. Simultaneously, another team hit the Thorne mansion. They found Julian hiding in his bedroom. His arm was bandaged. He tried to fight, but he was no match for trained officers. He was dragged out in tears. A third team, led by Miller himself, walked into the police station. They walked past the stunned desk sergeant from that first day and went straight to the chief's office. They arrested him at his desk, in the middle of a frantic phone call to Marcus Thorne. The corrupt system had been decapitated in a single, coordinated strike. The aftermath was swift and absolute. The trial was a media sensation. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the testimony of multiple victims, the Thorne empire crumbled. Marcus Thorne, the man who believed he was above the law, was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to 30 years in federal prison. Julian Thorne was convicted of aggravated assault and received a sentence of 15 years. The police chief and the corrupt officials all took plea deals, their careers and reputations destroyed. Justice had been served. It was not quiet or gentle. It was loud, cathartic, and complete. A few weeks later, John was sitting on the porch of the Jenkins house. The red spray paint was gone, replaced by a fresh coat of white. Sarah was beside him in a wheelchair, her broken bones mending. Max lay at her feet, his tail thumping a slow, steady rhythm against the wooden planks. He was old, he was scarred, but he was content. He was home. A car pulled up. A young man got out. John recognized him as one of the teens who had stood by and filmed the first assault. The boy approached the porch, his head down. I came to apologize, he stammered, not looking at them. What we did, just watching, it was wrong. We were afraid. But that's not an excuse, I'm sorry. He laid a small bouquet of flowers on the steps, turned, and walked away. Sarah watched him go. I think he meant it, she said softly. I think so too, John replied. The quiet settled around them again. It was a different kind of quiet now. Not the empty silence of John's old life, but a peaceful, earned silence. The quiet after the storm. A letter had arrived for him that morning. It was from Ben Carter. Enclosed was a check for a substantial amount of money, his portion of the civil settlement from the Thorne estate. John knew exactly what he was going to do with it. He looked at Max, the loyal soldier who had stood his ground when no one else would. He thought of all the other dogs like him, retired from service, waiting in shelters. He thought of all the other veterans like himself, lost and looking for a purpose. I'm starting something new, he told Sarah, a nonprofit. We're going to rescue retired military and police dogs. We're going to pair them with veterans who need them. A new mission for both of them. Sarah smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. Can I help? I was counting on it, John said. You and Max can be our first success story. He had found his fortune. It was not the money in the bank. It was this peace, this purpose, this new family forged in fire and bound by loyalty. He was no longer a ghost haunted by the past. He was a man building a future. He looked out at the quiet street, at the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The debt to his friend, Mark Jenkins, could never be fully repaid, but he knew, deep in his soul, that he had honored his memory. He had kept his promise. God does not always remove the storm. Sometimes he calms the sailor, and sometimes he places strength and an unshakable resolve inside ordinary people, calling them to stand for those who cannot stand for themselves. He calls them to be the protectors in the dark, the quiet warriors who ask for nothing but give everything. When we choose truth over silence, when we choose courage over comfort, we become the instruments of a justice that is far greater than our own. We light a candle that cannot be extinguished by the winds of corruption or the threats of the powerful. Courage is not about size or age or rank. It is the quiet promise made in a moment of crisis. It is the steadfast loyalty of a wounded friend. It is the decision to speak up when the world demands your silence. It is the proof that even after the deepest darkness, the light will and must prevail.